At 29, my parents tried to steal my grandparents' $2,200,000 house and told me, "Be out by Saturday." I called my lawyer, now they're begging for a second chance. I'm 29 years old, and I never imagined I'd be fighting my own family over what my grandparents built. When I graduated with my accounting degree, my first responsibility was to ensure that their $3.2 million fortune was securely locked in a trust. Why? I had been watching the Vultures circle for years, and the Vultures were my parents and sister. You'll need the complete context to appreciate why I went to such lengths. This isn't only about money and property. This is about 2 decades of deception, entitlement, and witnessing people who were supposed to be family treat the souls I knew like walking bank accounts. So, buckle up, because things is going to get messy. My grandparents, Harold and Evelyn Whitaker, reared me from the age of 6. My biological parents, Richard and Margaret, essentially abandoned me off at their house to pursue lucrative careers in another state. But honestly, what they really wanted was a life devoid of responsibility, jumping from one get-rich scheme to the next. Each one crashed and burned spectacularly. I still remember the day they left me. I was 6 years old and stood on my grandparents' driveway holding a little suitcase and my beloved bear. Mom was shedding phony tears while Dad was checking his watch. "It's only temporary," they kept insisting, "just until we get settled in our new jobs." These new occupations involved selling a magical water purification technology, which turned out to be a pyramid scheme. They lost everything within 8 months. But by then, I had made my peace with Harold and Evelyn, referring to them as Grandma and Grandpa, and feeling more at ease than I had with my actual parents. My childhood home was not just ordinary house. It was a stunning Victorian in a historic Philadelphia neighborhood built in 1891, complete with original woodwork, stained glass windows, and a wraparound porch that creaked in all the right places. The house had passed down through 4 generations of Grandpa Harold's family. His grandpa had been a successful businessman who had constructed it for his increasing family, and it had been passed down through the generations, each adding their own flourishes while preserving the original spirit. But it wasn't simply the house. There were 4 rental properties. My grandparents had a duplex in West Philadelphia and 3 row homes in South Philadelphia. Grandpa had purchased them in the 1980s, when real estate was inexpensive, fixed them up personally, and rented them to working families at fair rates. He wasn't looking to make a lot of money from tenants. He only needed a consistent wage and enough housing. Those properties alone were worth approximately $950,000. Then there were investments. Grandpa Harold had spent 40 years as an accountant at a steel firm, living modestly and saving furiously. He'd invested in index funds, municipal bonds, and blue-chip equities. Nothing showy or hazardous, simply sustained, consistent growth over decades. By the time I moved in, their investment portfolio was worth about $1 million. The estate's total value was approximately $3.2 million. There is no minor change. But for me, it was never about money. That house served as a dwelling. It was here that I learned what it was like to have a true family. Every morning, I'd wake up to the aroma of Grandma Evelyn's freshly made muffin, elderberry on Mondays, chocolate chip on Fridays, and banana nut on Wednesdays. She had an entire rotation system. "Rise and shine, little numbers guy," she'd say from the kitchen, long before I even considered becoming an accountant. When I was 8, instead of playing outside, I spent the entire afternoon organizing my baseball cards by statistics, which earned me the nickname. Grandpa Harold taught me how to fish at the neighborhood park with infinite patience. Even when I kept tangling my line or dropping the bait bucket into the water, he'd chuckle, untangle it all, and show me again. "Patience, Nathan Cole," he would say. "Good things come to those who wait." Fish job is the ideal guy to spend your life with. Rushing never helps. In the evenings, we'd relax in the library, which was an entire room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookcases created by Grandpa himself. Each of us would have our own book, and we'd read in silence, occasionally discussing portions that piqued our interest. Grandpa enjoyed historical biographies. Grandma preferred mysteries. I worked my way through everything from Tough Boys to financial publications. Sunday mornings were sacrosanct. Grandma would prepare this magnificent breakfast: eggs, bacon, handmade biscuits, and fresh fruit salad. We'd sit around the dining room table for hours, discussing everything: current events, history, and what I was learning at school. They treated me as an equal, never speaking down to me and always interested in my thoughts. Even when I was a child, they taught me the values that would shape the rest of my life: honesty, hard work, accountability, and integrity. Grandpa always told Nathan Cole, "Your word is your bond. Break it, and you lose something you can't get back." He lived by that idea. If he promised a tenant that he would fix something, it was fixed. We went fishing on Saturday, like he promised. Rain or shine. Grandma always advocated for education and independence. An individual must be able to stand on their own 2 feet. She'd repeat this while teaching me how to cook, balance a budget, or change a tire, especially when others attempted to knock them down. She had grown up during the Depression, witnessed her own family's devastation, and was adamant that I would be prepared to face anything life threw at me. Little did I know how prophetic those remarks would prove to be. My relationship with my biological parents and younger sister Claire was difficult at best. Actually, complicated is overly generous. It was almost non-existent, except when they needed something. They'd turn up around 3 times a year, generally around Christmas when gifts were anticipated, or whenever they needed money. I learned how to spot the pattern. Dad would call a few days ahead, suddenly interested in how I was doing, inquiring about school, and acting like a true father. Then they'd appear, all grins and intricate stories about whatever endeavor they were involved in. Now, each visit followed the same weary script. The over-the-top devotion began with hugs that lasted much too long, compliments that ring hollow, questions about my life that they didn't want answered. Then there were casual observations about how large the house was and how much the neighbors must have valued it, subtle references to Grandpa's investments. This would result in a heartfelt story about unforeseen bills. The car had broken down, medical costs for some strange illness, an investment opportunity that required only a small amount of capital to take off, business expenses that insurance did not cover. There's always something, always urgent. I am constantly in need of money right now. Also, there have been loan requests. They were never reimbursed, not once in 23 years. I recall one specific Christmas when I was 13. Dad spent the whole visit telling Grandpa about his current scheme, which involved selling prepaid legal services door to door. He needed $6,000 to acquire his region and get started. "This is it," Poppy repeatedly said. "This is the one that will make us rich." Grandpa gave him $3,500. By March, the state attorney general had shut the company down for fraud. Dad never mentioned paying Grandpa back. When I asked about it years later, Grandpa simply shook his head. Some lessons require money to learn. I discovered my son isn't excellent with either responsibility or money. My father had declared bankruptcy twice before I was 11, once when I was 7 and once when I was 10. My grandparents found out both times when creditors began contacting their house seeking for him. He has exploited their address for a variety of commercial operations without permission. Mom was involved in everything, from magical diet pills to bogus shares, vital oils, and discounted vacation memberships. She'd phone Grandma, feverishly eager about each new prospect, discussing 7-figure earnings and early retirement. 4 months later, she'd be crying about how the company had duped her, how she'd lost money, and how they needed assistance getting back on their feet. They lived far over their means, constantly looking for that great opportunity that would ultimately make them wealthy. Dad drove a leased Mercedes that he could not afford. Mom wore designer clothes purchased with credit cards that she couldn't pay off. They rented a townhouse in a posh neighborhood and claimed ownership. My sister Claire, who is 6 years younger than me, grew up watching them and learning every trick in the book. By her adolescent years, she had mastered entitlement, merging their worst attributes into one horror package. I recall one event when she was 15 and I was 22, home from college for Thanksgiving. Grandma had these ancient bruises that her mother had given her, gorgeous artifacts from the 1930s, not worth a fortune, yet has priceless and sentimental value. Claire stole 4 of them at dinner, pawned them for $250 the next day, and used the proceeds to purchase concert tickets. When Grandma noticed they were missing and inquired, Claire wept and claimed she saw me staring at them, meaning I had taken them. My parents immediately accused me. I didn't even question her. Only when the pawn shop contacted did Claire make the mistake of using Grandma's name. Did the truth get out? My parents said, "She's only a teenager. They make mistakes." Claire used Grandpa's credit card number, which she had learned after seeing it laying around, to buy $1,800 in clothing online. When the bill arrived, she explained that she thought it was fine because family shares things. Mom supported her, arguing that we should teach her financial responsibility rather than punishing her for being confused. Grandpa paid the bill. He always paid, but I could tell it was taking its toll. He was disappointed that his own son had raised such a manipulative child. "Your sister should come live with us, too," Grandma once proposed after a particularly traumatic visit in which Claire stole money from my wallet and attempted to blame it on the mailman. Maybe if we raised her, she'd be different, but my parents refused. Claire was their baby, the child they could manage to raise because she required so little actual care. She had learned early on that tears and manipulation would get her what she wanted. Why would they give it up? The truth was that my parents couldn't handle a child who required proper care and attention. That's why they dumped me with my grandparents in the first place. But Claire was easy. She kept herself entertained, demanded stuff rather than affection, and never asked awkward questions about where they went for weeks at a time. As my grandparents aged and their health deteriorated, the family dynamic became more tense. I was in college at the time, juggling academics and caregiving responsibilities. And that's when my parents' interest in the estate shifted from subtle to aggressive. Dad began phoning frequently, asking hard questions about their health, will, and financial advice. Mom would email links to retirement communities, implying that the house was too much for them to handle. Each visit became stressful, with hushed chats that abruptly ended the moment I entered a room. My grandparents' constant support propelled me to academic success throughout my school years. While other children received new phones or fashionable clothing, my grandparents invested in books, museum memberships, and educational excursions. When I turned 17, I began working part-time at the local library to help with expenditures. They insisted it was unnecessary, but I observed how medication prices and property taxes were stretching their limited income. When I was a senior in high school, something happened in our neighborhood that had a significant impact on my decision to study accounting. The Millers, an elderly couple, lost everything after their son forced them to sign over power of attorney, then entirely drained their accounts. The helplessness, the complete betrayal they felt, tormented me. I knew then that I wanted to understand finances well enough to prevent such injustices, particularly for vulnerable elders. College was really difficult, while my grandparents' health deteriorated quickly. Grandpa got severe cardiac problems that necessitated many surgery. Grandma was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. I chose a nearby university so that I could live at home and help care for them, turning down scholarships to more prestigious institutions away. During my last year, I was taking classes all day, studying all night, and driving them to numerous medical appointments in the between. Grandpa had appointments with his cardiologist, a primary care doctor who specializes on kidney function. Grandma required regular check-ins with her neurologist, as well as different tests to track the advancement of her dementia. I became an expert at reading insurance forms, comprehending medical language, and communicating with doctors and nurses. I learned which prescriptions could not be used together, which symptoms needed rapid attention, and how to deal with Grandma when she became confused and terrified. It was completely exhausting. I'd get up at 6, Tredio AM, help Grandpa with his daily meds and breakfast, leave by 8 for my first class, come home for lunch and check on them, return after afternoon sessions, then spend the nights making dinner, helping with nightly meds, and studying late into the night. My social life was non-existent. Dating was impossible. Friends from class would invite me out, but I would have to decline since I needed to be at home for medication scheduling. But they had made enormous sacrifices for me. This was exactly what a family does. This was what true love looked like. Showing up, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. The day I graduated from college was bittersweet. It was a glorious spring morning in May. One of those ideal Philadelphia days when the weather is exactly right and anything seems conceivable. Standing there in my cap and gown, surveying the audience from the production area, I noticed Grandpa in his wheelchair, an oxygen tank humming beside him. Getting him to the ceremony had been a significant undertaking. I'd rented a medical transport van and worked with the university on wheelchair accessibility. He had arranged for portable oxygen, but he insisted on being present despite his doctor's warnings. Grandma sat next to him in her Sunday best, occasionally looking perplexed about where we were, but always beaming widely when our gazes connected. Throughout the ceremony, I noticed her asking Grandpa questions, undoubtedly wondering what we were doing here, and him patiently reiterating again, and over that, their grandson was graduating. They had persisted on going despite everything. The wild horses couldn't keep us away. Grandpa had said that morning, as I assisted him with his tie, that his hands were too shaky to manage it himself. "We've been waiting for this day since you moved in with us." My parents and Claire disappeared. They'd received their invitations 3 months in advance, fancy printed ones, because graduation was significant to me. Mom had RSVP'd. Yes. Even asked what time to arrive. Claire texted that she wouldn't miss it for the world. Mom texted car trouble at 7:15 a.m. on graduation day. "Will not be able to make it. Congratulations. Car trouble." Their customary reason for missing events they did not wish to attend. I stopped believing their excuses around the age of 13. What hurt was not the absence itself. I'd become used to it. It was casual cruelty. They couldn't be bothered to come up with a creative lie. But, you know what? When they called my name and I walked across the platform to accept my graduation, I looked out into the audience and saw Grandpa crying, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. Grandma was clapping so loudly that a nearby usher had to gently ask her to tone it down. After the ceremony, they waited while I took photos with my classmates. Then Grandpa struggled to his feet. He insisted on standing, despite the obvious pain, and drew me into an embrace. "Your grandmother and I are so proud of you," he continued, his voice full with emotion. "You're going to do fantastic things, Nathan Cole." "Great things," Grandma said in one of her clearer times. "You have a degree in accounting, but your heart desires justice. Don't ever lose that." We went to dine at their favorite restaurant, a little Italian eatery they'd been visiting since the 1980s. The proprietor recognized them, gave us the best table, and there was no rush, despite the fact that we stayed for 3 hours. We spoke about everything. My work prospects, their health, and memories from my upbringing. It was perfect. That night, while putting Grandpa into bed, he remarked something that resonated with me. "Your folks don't realize what they're missing. Their loss is great, yet they are completely unaware of it." 4 weeks after graduation, Grandpa Harold died in his sleep. I was in the room down the hall, working on a job application, when I noticed I hadn't heard his normal 3:30 a.m. go to the restroom. Something felt odd. I went to check on him and found him serene, as if he had just fallen asleep while reading. The book he had been reading, an Abraham Lincoln biography, remained open on his chest. The doctor said it was his heart and that he probably didn't feel anything, that it was the most serene death anyone could hope for. However, being peaceful does not alleviate the pain. Doesn't fill the sudden void of understanding you'll never speak again with someone who has shaped your entire existence. I sat with him for 2 hours before contacting anyone, simply holding his hand, saying goodbye, and thanking him for everything. Grandma Evelyn followed exactly 7 months later. The doctors claimed it was pneumonia, but I knew better. She had lost her five-year-old partner, her anchor, and everything. The dementia had been advancing swiftly since Grandpa died, as if losing him hastened her demise. Some days, she couldn't remember me. Other days, she'd address me as Harold and engage in lengthy chats with me as if I were her husband. Her final clear day came roughly 10 days before her death. She seized my hand with surprising power and stared at me with complete clarity. "Nathan Cole," she said unequivocally, without confusion or uncertainty. "You are our greatest achievement, not the house, the properties, or anything else. You, the man you've become." She grinned. "Harold and I ensured that everything was preserved. It is not something your parents can touch. You don't have to worry about it. Just assure me that you will be happy. Promise me you'll find people who love you as much as we do," I said through tears. She died calmly in her sleep 4 days before Thanksgiving, while I held her hand and read aloud from her favorite mystery novel. I'd like to assume she heard me, that she wasn't terrified, and that she knew she was loved to the end. Standing at her bedside as she took her dying breath, holding her fragile hand, I made a quiet commitment to defend everything they'd built, taught me, and sacrificed to provide me with a better life than their own son had. The funeral seemed strange. My parents and Claire immediately appeared. They were dressed in costly black clothes, and I knew they couldn't afford to play sad family members. They paid special attention to older relatives and neighbors, gathering business cards from my grandparents' estate attorney and financial advisor like they were at a conference. Dad kept asking when the will would be read, as if we were in an old movie. They had no idea that I had already been working behind the scenes for some months. You know, approximately 14 months before Grandpa died, he pulled me aside in one of his lucid moments between hospital stays. "Nathan Cole," he murmured, squeezing my hand with unexpected strength. "I understand what your parents are like. I'm no idiot. Your grandmother and I have been watching them circle like sharks for years." He paused, taking a laborious breath. "We're putting everything in trust, with you as trustee. It's the only way to defend what we've created. However, you must approach this with caution. Do not tell anyone until it is absolutely required." We'd worked with their estate counsel, a bright woman named Rebecca Hayes, who had known my grandparents for decades, to form an airtight trust. Everything, including the Victorian mansion, 4 rental houses, and investment accounts, was transferred to the Harold and Evelyn Whitaker Family Trust. I was named sole trustee, with complete control over all assets. My parents and Claire were not listed anywhere in the documentation. Rebecca had been meticulous. "Your grandparents were very clear about their wishes," she explained at one planning session. "They wanted to ensure you were protected, and that their legacy wasn't squandered by people who'd never appreciated them." After the funeral, there was a meeting about the inheritance, but it was not the dramatic reading my parents had hoped for. Rebecca simply stated that all assets had been placed in a trust, and I was the trustee. She didn't explain the trust's terms or structure. My parents' disappointment was palpable, yet they did not raise a fuss. Not yet. "Of course, we understand," Dad responded calmly. "These issues require time to work out. We're here to help Nathan Cole through this difficult transition." They were regrouping and plotting their next move. For the first few months, I remained in the Victorian home, surrounded by memories. I continued working at the accounting business, where I had gotten a job straight after college, managing estates and trusts for customers. The irony was not lost on me. I was assisting other families in navigating similar situations to mine. My parents and Claire started what I can only describe as a pressure campaign. They'd call all the time with helpful advice on selling the house because it was too big for one person, or cashing out the rental properties because the market was hot at the moment. Each suggestion, of course, involves them receiving a portion of the revenues. Claire was especially aggressive. She'd show up unannounced with her pals, giving them tours of her family house and discussing her plans to refurbish the kitchen after she'd moved in. The audacity was breathtaking. I came home one afternoon to find her measuring windows for curtains. "What are you doing?" I inquired. "Just planning ahead," she stated brightly. "This place needs updating, and I have great ideas." "Claire, you don't live here." "Not yet," she said, with a knowing smile that made my blood boil. I began documenting everything, every phone call, visit, and suggestion for selling assets. My friend Marcus, who had attended law school and specialized in estate litigation, had advised me, Trust me, document everything. Text messages, emails, witnesses to conversations. If this goes wrong, you'll need proof. Marcus turned out to be entirely correct. The real trouble began about 9 months after Grandma died. When I returned home from work one evening, I found my parents sitting in the living room with a man in a cheap suit who introduced himself as a notary. Dad stood up with a triumphant expression. "Nathan Cole, we've been patient, but it's time to face reality," he said. "This house is too much for you to handle alone. Your mother and I have decided to take over the primary residence while you focus on your career. We've prepared the paperwork to transfer the title to our names. We just need your signature as trustee to approve the transfer." Its sheer audacity stunned me for a moment. They'd brought a notary to my house without warning, expecting me to simply sign over a multi-million-dollar property because they thought it was best. "This is my home," I explained quietly, "and I'm not signing anything." Mom's face dropped into tears. Her signature move. "How can you be so selfish? We're your parents. After everything we've done for you. What have you done for me?" The question came out sharper than I had intended, but I was done pretending. "You dropped me off here when I was 6 and barely visited. Grandpa and Grandma raised me. They paid for my education, took care of me when I was sick, showed up for every important moment. Where were you? Chasing your next big scheme?" Dad's face is red. "We're still your parents, and we have rights. This house belonged to my father, which means it should pass to me, not to some grandkid who got lucky with a trust. Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing when he created that trust," I said. "Now, please leave, all of you." They left, but not before Dad promised, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." The following few weeks were tense. My parents hired a low-cost attorney who threatened them with legal action for breach of trust and undue influence. Rebecca laughed when she noticed them. "These are empty threats," she said. "The trust was properly executed. Your grandparents were of sound mind, and you have documentation of their intentions. They're bluffing." But I knew my parents weren't finished. They were simply changing tactics. Then came last week, which demonstrated how low they'd sink. I'd taken a few days off work to spend with Marcus upstate for his birthday. When I returned Saturday afternoon, I found my parents and Claire standing on my porch, looking as smug as I had ever seen. "Nathan Cole," Mom exclaimed enthusiastically. "We're so glad you're home. We need to talk." Something about their assurance immediately set me on edge. They were neither anxious nor angry. They were triumphant. "We've had the house signed over to our names," Dad declared without explanation. "Everything's been transferred. We spoke with the county recorder's office, filed all the necessary documents. You have until Saturday to move out. We're being generous, giving you 6 days." My heart has stopped. "What are you talking about?" Claire brought out a packet containing official-looking paperwork. "We found a sympathetic judge who understood that the trust was invalid due to undue influence. The house has been transferred to Dad's name as the rightful heir. It's all legal and final." I focused on the paper she was waving, my mind racing. "Let me see those." "No need," Dad responded, pulling the folder back. "You'll get copies when you move out. We're being very reasonable about this. You can take your personal belongings, but all furniture and fixtures stay. They belong to the house." "This is insane," I murmured, trying to keep my voice calm. "You can't just forge documents and steal someone's house." "Forge?" Mom gasped, hand to her chest. "How dare you? Everything was done legally. The county has records. We filed everything properly." They weren't lying about filing documents. I could see genuine confidence in their faces. They'd actually gone to the county and filed something. The question was, what had they filed, and how had they managed it? "I'm calling Rebecca," I said, pulling out my phone. "Go ahead," Dad said. "She'll tell you the same thing. The house is ours now. Saturday. Nathan Cole. Be out by Saturday." They left, and I immediately contacted Rebecca. She was astonished, but not panicked. "They can file whatever they want," she explained. "That doesn't make it valid. I need to see exactly what they filed. Can you go to the county recorder's office Tuesday morning and get copies?" That weekend was one of the longest of my life. I rarely slept, thinking through situations, trying to figure out their angle. Marcus drove down Saturday to assist me go about ideas. "They must have forged something," he continued, pacing my living room. "Maybe they created fake documents showing you signed over your trustee powers or forged your grandparents' signatures on a deed transfer. Either way, it's fraud." Tuesday morning, I was at the county recorder's office when they opened. The clerk looked up the records, and sure enough, there was a new filing from earlier that week. A quitclaim deed transferring the property from the trust to Richard Bennett, signed by me as trustee. Except I'd never signed anything. The signature wasn't even close to mine. "This is forgery," I told the clerk, who looked uneasy. "I can't make that determination, sir," she answered. "You'll need to file a challenge through the courts." I acquired copies of everything and promptly forwarded them to Rebecca and Marcus. Rebecca's response was quick. "They've committed several felonies, forgery, fraud, possibly conspiracy. We need to act fast." Wednesday morning, Rebecca filed an emergency motion to avoid the fraudulent deed and set a hearing for Friday. She also called the district attorney's office about potential criminal charges. Meanwhile, I gathered every piece of evidence I had. the original trust documents with my actual signature for comparison, bank records proving I'd never deposited any money from a bogus property sale, and testimony from my neighbors who could corroborate I'd been living continuously in the house. Marcus helped me review everything. The beautiful thing about forgery is that it's usually pretty easy to prove, he remarked. Handwriting analysis, lack of notarization records, no money trail. They were idiots to try this. Thursday evening, I got a call from Dad. Nathan Cole, we're coming by tomorrow with movers. Be packed and ready. We're being generous, letting you say farewell to the old place. Tomorrow's not going to go the way you think, I said. Empty threats, he sneered. We've already talked to a moving company. Everything's arranged. I didn't fight, just told him I'd see them tomorrow and hung up. Friday morning dawned. I was awake at dawn, adrenaline caressing through my system. Marcus arrived early, along with Rebecca. We sat in the living room, drinking coffee and waited. At exactly 9:30 a.m., a moving truck showed up. My parents and Claire appeared from Dad's car, still wearing those smug faces. Behind them were 4 movers, looking bewildered about why they were in a house where someone was clearly still living. I stepped onto the porch. Marcus and Rebecca flanked me, both carrying briefcases. Dad's smile wavered as he spotted the lawyers. What's this? This, Rebecca replied crisply, is me informing you that you've committed multiple felonies, and there are currently police officers on their way to discuss your attempted fraud. Mom's face grew pale. This is ridiculous. We filed everything legally. You filed a forged document, Marcus continued, holding out the papers. This signature isn't Nathan Cole's. The notary stamp is phony. There's no record of any money moving hands. You basically falsified his signature on a quitclaim deed and sought to steal a $2.2 million house. Claire, who'd seemed so confident, suddenly looked like she might puke up. Dad, you said this would work. You said the lawyer informed you it was legal. What lawyer? I asked. Because Rebecca here is the actual estate attorney, and she certainly didn't help you commit fraud. That's when Dad's mask finally crumbled. You ungrateful piece of work. We're your parents. This house should be ours. Your grandfather was my father, and he chose to leave everything to Nathan Cole because he knew exactly what you are, Rebecca interjected. Now you can leave voluntarily, or you can explain yourselves to the police. As if on cue, 3 police cruisers pulled up. The policemen I'd worked with when filing the fraud report walked out. I'd spent Tuesday afternoon in the police, going through everything with them, and they'd been suitably disgusted by my parents' idea. The movers, realizing they'd gotten caught up in something unlawful, hastily got back in their truck and left. Can't blame them. What ensued was magnificent anarchy. The officers asked my parents to explain how they'd obtained the quitclaim deed. Dad tried to bluster about having legal claim to his father's property. Mom started crying and claimed they'd been informed the papers was real. Claire merely stood there looking shell-shocked, suddenly recognizing the implications of their actions. The officer demanded to see their documentation. When Dad reluctantly handed up the folder, the officer examined it and shook his head. Sir, this is clearly forged. The signature doesn't match the trust signature on file. The notary stamp isn't registered with any notary in this county, and there's no record of this transfer being approved by the trust's attorney. But we filed it with the county, Mom argued. Filing a fraudulent document is still fraud, ma'am, the officer answered. You can file anything you want, but that doesn't make it legal. Right then, another automobile drew up. Laura Bennett, the home care worker who'd been with my grandparents during their final years, stepped out. She'd heard about this circumstance through mutual friends and had offered to submit testimony concerning my grandparents' obvious wishes and my parents' absence during their final years. These people, Laura remarked, gesturing to my parents, visited maybe 5 times in the last 3 years of Harold and Evelyn's lives, and every visit ended with them asking about money or property. Nathan Cole was there every single day. He fed them, bathed them, regulated their meds, held their hands when they were scared. Those lovely folks knew exactly what they were doing when they founded that trust. Mom tried to interrupt, but Laura wasn't having it. She'd cared profoundly about my grandparents and was clearly furious on their behalf. Evelyn told me once in the end that her biggest concern was her son stealing from Nathan Cole after she was gone. She said, "We have to protect our boy," and that's exactly what they did. The officers informed my parents they were being charged with attempted fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. They were read their rights and escorted to the police station for processing. Claire, who was legally an accessory but hadn't signed anything herself, was warned she'd likely be summoned as a witness. As they were dragged away, Dad turned back one last time. "You're dead to us. You hear me? Dead? I've been dead to you since I was 6. I replied quietly. This is nothing new. After they went, I just stood there on the porch, trying to understand what had happened. Rebecca put a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing. Your grandparents would be proud," Marcus remarked. "And legally speaking, you're completely protected. That trust is solid, and now they've created a criminal record that will prevent any future challenges." Laura walked up and gave me a hug. "Harold and Evelyn loved you so much. They talked about you constantly, how smart you were, how nice, how you were the only family that mattered to them. This mansion is yours because you earned it through love, not because you demanded it. The legal aftermath took 6 months. My parents were convicted of fraud and forgery. The evidence was overwhelming. They received probation and fines and were required to make restitution for the legal expenditures they'd caused me. The court was particularly stern, emphasizing that attempting to steal from their own son made it worse, not better. Claire was never legally charged, but was obliged to give a deposition about her role. Turns out she'd known about the fake, but had convinced herself it was technically legal because Dad kept saying so. She apologized later in a quick email, but I didn't react. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. Living alone in the house my grandparents filled with warmth has been both comfortable and terrible. Every room holds memories. Grandpa reading in his favorite recliner by the fireplace. Grandma humming in the kitchen while she cooked Sunday dinner. The two of them dancing slowly to old songs when they thought I was studying upstairs. The silence seemed unnerving at first. I found myself talking aloud to them, asking for help or simply discussing my day. Sometimes, I swear I can hear Grandpa's booming chuckle or catch the faint aroma of Grandma's perfume. About 8 months after the confrontation, I made a crucial decision. Using a portion of the trust's funds, I founded the Harold and Evelyn Whitaker Scholarship Fund at my old university. It's geared to aiding students interested in accounting and financial protection for disadvantaged groups. This felt fitting, a continuation of their kind attitudes and a way to generate something positive from our family's difficult history. As for my parents, I've had no communication since that day on the porch. Sometimes, I see their names in my email spam folder or notice a missed call from an unfamiliar number. I've made peace with the chance we'll never have a healthy relationship.